With the trade deadline less than a month away, we are doing a two-part special where we look at the best and worst of Chris Drury since he became the Rangers general manager. Today, a look at his biggest swings and misses since taking the reins.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1003 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And so I also want to remind everybody that we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's go ahead. I got actually a couple of inquiries about this over the past, weeks, months, whatever. I think there's kind of a sense among Ranger fans that they want a little bit more coverage of Chris Drury, whether it's, from me, from other podcasts, from beat writers, whatever it might be. And you're just an honest evaluation of the job he's done as the Ranger general manager since taking the reins a couple of years ago, 3 years ago to be exact. And we're going to do that. We're going to do a two-part episode. Today is going to be the worst of Chris Drury. An episode that we'll probably do next week will be the best of Chris Drury. And at the very end, I'll kind of have my general thoughts, maybe even put a letter grade on, everything that Chris Drury has done thus far since becoming the Ranger general manager. But to get to the question, this came to us from Michael Giovanni on YouTube, and he said, "Hey, John, how about a review of our GM since he took over? We never discussed Drury, who is equally responsible for how the group performs, but we have yet to discuss his performance. Do you think he is doing a job so outstanding that he is above scrutiny? I mean, he never does a press conference ever. Are we, the fans, not entitled to a few questions?" Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's been so infallible that we can't critique some of the things that he's done. As far as him doing like a press conference and holding like an open Q&A session to Ranger fans, I mean, it would be nice. I get where you're coming from. It'd be nice if Drury, communicated with the fans a little bit more than he does. But I don't think that's really uncommon for NHL GMs. They're not really that open with the fan base and what they're doing. I mean, they'll talk to them every once in a while, but I mean, you know how it gets. Fans are very emotional, and I just don't know that he probably doesn't see the benefit of doing that either for himself or for the team. If fans are like asking him about his trade deadline strategy, I mean, why would he answer a question like that and put it out into the air and let other GMs know what he's thinking? So yeah, it'd be nice if there was a little bit more transparency. But again, I don't think that what he does, the way he operates, is all that unique from other general managers. But with that, let's go ahead and dive into, again, some of the miscues that he's had. We're going to focus basically on free agent signings, trades, and contract extensions that Drury has given out since becoming the Ranger GM. We're not going to talk about anything that he did as the assistant GM because obviously final say did not go to him in those days. And we're not really going to look too much at drafts because he's only been the GM for 3 years, and you guys know how it works. It takes a while for these players to get to the NHL and really show what they can do. So for the most part, that's what we're going to talk about. Trades, free agent signings, and the contract extensions that Drury has given to his players. And again, this is the worst of Chris Drury. We'll do the second part of this two-parter next week where we look at the best of Chris Drury. As far as worst trades, the one that immediately comes to mind, I think for basically everybody, is this trade that he struck with the Blues a couple of years ago, sending Pavel Buchnevich to St. Louis in exchange for Sammy Blais and a second-round draft pick. The Rangers ended up trading that second-round pick to the Jets. That was part of the Andrew Kopp deal. So if nothing else, I guess that's the silver line there. Andrew Kopp came over, was a good player for the Rangers during the end of that season, into the postseason. We had a lot of fun cheering on the Rangers that year. Unfortunately, they just fell 2 wins short of making it to the Stanley Cup final. But that, like I said, is only a very slight silver lining. The rest of this trade was and still is a complete nightmare for the Rangers, basically just a disaster. As I said in a recent episode, because it does feel like this trade, discussions around this trade come up every so often, the Buchnevich trade. I understood at the time the logic and still do to some extent. They didn't feel like they could afford Pavel Buchnevich, and they wanted to open up some opportunities for some of their young guys. And, they wanted more physicality. You could bring in Sammy Blais for something like that. So I understood the logic, but I still didn't agree with the trade. I still didn't like the trade. And there's no denying it at this point. It's gone badly. Like I said, it's basically been a disaster. Pavel Buchnevich has become a point-per-game player, or right on the cusp of a point-per-game player for St. Louis. The Ranger top line has really yet to recover, really yet to find a suitable replacement for Pavel Buchnevich. Nobody is really stuck there. And even the way things stand right now, we'll see what they do at the deadline, but they don't really have an ideal option as far as who should be on the top line right wing at this moment. Sammy Blais, with him, he had the injury. I mean, maybe things could have gone a little bit better for him, but he was injured on that dirty play by PK Subban and then missed the rest of that season. Came back the next year, looked like he could barely move out there. So I feel bad for Blais. They end up trading him back to St. Louis in the Tarasenko deal. It's hindsight's always 2020, right? And it's easy now to look back at everything Drury did that offseason. You bring in Blais and you bring in Nemeth and you bring in Barclay Goodrow and you bring in Ryan Reeves, and you can look at those four players and all the money they were making combined and say, well, that money would have been better spent on Pavel Buchnevich. You're absolutely correct about that. And there's people at the time that really did not want to see Buchnevich go. Count me among you. But yeah, looking at it in hindsight, I mean, Chris Drury lost this trade and he lost it badly. I think it's pretty safe to say that this is the worst trade of Chris Drury's tenure. So for people that say that, like, oh, Drury gets a free pass from Ranger fans, or not even fans, but I mean, some fans, I guess you could say, but Drury gets a free pass from all of us, podcasters and beat writers and everything. There it is. Straight from at least one Ranger podcaster here. That was a terrible trade by Chris Drury. Awful. Did not work out in the slightest. And the Rangers continue to get hurt by it. So that's a disaster of a trade by Chris Drury. There, you said it. I said it. We're all good now. As far as other bad trades, I mean, none really stand out like this. There's one that kind of pains me to include, but I'm going to do it anyway. I mentioned Ryan Reeves a second ago. To acquire him from Vegas in exchange for a third-round pick in 2021, that's a little bit of a high price, I would say, for somebody that's basically just an enforcer. A third-round pick, that was kind of a lot. And again, it pains me to include Reeves because I like Reeves. I think he's a fun player. I think he kind of instilled a little bit of personality into that Ranger team. But he was also making $1.75 million per season. That's not that much either. But again, for a fourth-line enforcer, probably a little bit on the expensive side. I mean, he's making a decent amount with Toronto right now. So I guess it's not the Rangers aren't the only team that sees value in him. But they give up the third rounder and they pay him a decent amount of money. And I get that the Rangers wanted to get bigger and tougher after the whole Tom Wilson BS that happened the season before. But probably not the best trade here for the Rangers, overpaying a little bit and then also extending him by a year. Basically, as soon as the Rangers traded for him, they gave him that 1-year extension. They really didn't have to do that. And that might have, prevented them from making another move the following offseason. Of course, he didn't even make it through his second season with the Rangers before he was dealt to Minnesota, I believe it was. So a couple of bad trades. Again, the Buchnevich one stands out like no other. I mean, that's the one trade Drury has made that has been just a complete catastrophe. Just hasn't been good. And the Rangers, like I said, it hurt them when they did it. It's continued to hurt them since. It will continue to hurt them until they figure out the top line right wing spot. Even if they go out at the deadline this season and somehow reacquire Pavel Buchnevich, I mean, on one hand, I think a lot of Ranger fans would be thrilled about that. But on the other, man, you could have just re-signed him. Now you're going to have to give up all these assets to bring in Pavel Buchnevich after he's become an even better player for the Blues than he was for the Rangers. So, yeah, not a good trade at all there. To me, as far as trades go, though, there's none other than these two that really stand out in a bad way. And even the Reeves trade, I mean, it's not a disaster. The only real disastrous trade that Drury has made, like I said, is the Pavel Buchnevich trade. But we're going to keep everything rolling. Take a look at some of Drury's other swings and misses since he's become the GM of the Rangers. We're going to look at some of his worst free agent signings. There is one that really stands out like a sore thumb. A lot of you probably can already guess what it's going to be, but we're going to talk about that signing, a couple other so-so signings by Chris Drury since he's become the Ranger general manager. We will do that in just a second here. First, though, we definitely would like to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Also want to let everyone know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now you can also find it on Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find the Locked On Sports Today channel now on Amazon Fire TV. All right, so let's go ahead and keep everything rolling. Drury has also had some swings and misses when it comes to free agent signings. I do want to mention real quick, though, for the everydayers, you guys are going to want to stick around this week. Like I said, we're eventually going to do an episode where we look at the best of Chris Drury, and obviously Rangers playing the Flames tonight. They've had some pretty crazy games over the past couple of seasons, so sure, it's going to be a fun one. I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about when it's over, so definitely stick around for that. That'll be tomorrow's episode. But for right now, yes, the worst free agent signings by Chris Drury since he's become the Ranger general manager. Again, we're not counting anything when he was assistant GM, only during his time as the GM. So the worst one, and I think a lot of you can probably take a guess at this one, is Patrick Nemeth. I thought about just saying Patrick Nemeth's name here and then moving on to something else, but we'll break this one down in some greater detail. It's got to be Drury's worst free agent signing to date. I'm not going to do revisionist history because I didn't really hate this signing when it happened. You know, Patrick Nemeth, 3 years at $2.5 million a season, felt a little expensive, and he gave him a 3-year deal. That felt like it was maybe 1 year too many. But I thought, okay, he'll be on the third pairing. He'll give some stability there. He's a veteran. He was 28 or 29 at the time. So I didn't see anything egregiously wrong with this signing. Again, maybe a little bit more than you'd like to pay for a Patrick Nemeth, but I thought he'd play, steady, consistent, competent hockey, and boy, was I wrong on that one because Patrick Nemeth was basically a disaster. The thing, again, that makes this so bad is that, the length and the price, and Nemeth just never really got going with the Rangers. I don't know what happened. He was thought of as at least a decent defenseman before coming here. I did hear from at least one Avalanche fan, when I tweeted out about Nemeth the day that they signed him, yeah, you guys are in for it. So there was at least a couple of fans out there that were aware that, this might not be the best signing for the Rangers, fans of other teams, that is. But it's funny, as a quick aside here, the Rangers that season, Nemeth's first with the team, that was 2 years ago. That was the year that the Rangers ended up in the Eastern Conference Final. And obviously at the trade deadline that year, the Rangers were wheeling and dealing, bringing in Vetrano, bringing in Kopp, bringing in Tyler Mott for the first time, and also bringing in Justin Braun. I've kind of joked about this, but I'm also kind of serious. You could very easily make the case that of all those players that the Rangers traded for, the most important one was Justin Braun. Not that he was a Norris Trophy candidate at this point in his career. He was getting quite a bit older at that time. I think he was 35 or 36 when the Rangers got him, about 35, I want to say. But the bottom line, acquiring Justin Braun allowed the Rangers to make Patrick Nemeth a healthy scratch. And I'm not sure they make it as far as they do in the playoffs that year with Nemeth on the ice. And that might sound kind of mean, but it felt like a very much needed upgrade. Nemeth had to come out of the lineup. He even played in a couple of playoff games, and it didn't go very well. But bottom line, it wasn't a good signing. There were obviously other ways that they could have used that money. They could have put that $2.5 million or some of it toward hanging on to Pavel Buchnevich. What makes the entire thing so much worse, though, is that, again, Nemeth was terrible. We know that. But in the offseason the following year, he still had 2 years left on his contract at $2.5 million a clip. There is not a team in the NHL that would have accepted him in a trade if the Rangers offered him for free. There's no way that anybody was going to take on that contract at that dollar amount, given the season that Nemeth had just had for the Rangers. So what did the Rangers do? Well, they desperately had to get Patrick Nemeth off of their books. They could not afford to pay this guy $2.5 million a season for the next 2 years. So they had to trade him to the Coyotes with what turned out to be, or along with what turned out to be a 2026 second-round pick and also a 2025 second-round pick. So the Coyotes have yet to make those selections, but they did that, and the Rangers got Ty Emberson back in return, but, I mean, who cares? They basically gave Nemeth to the Coyotes along with a couple of draft picks to just take him off of the Rangers' hands. And they did that, and you will all be shocked to know that Patrick Nemeth did not play very well in his one season with the Coyotes, and then was actually he was placed on waivers. And again, you'll be shocked to know that he did not get claimed by anybody when he was on waivers, and then he was bought out of his contract. And apparently Patrick Nemeth is now playing in the National League in Switzerland, which is a league that I'm not really all that familiar with, but that's where Patrick Nemeth is at this moment. So yes, that I think that was a terrible signing by Drury. There's no other way to slice it. You could have, again, put that money toward hanging on to Buchnevich. You could have done just about anything else with that money, and it probably would have been a better decision than bringing in Patrick Nemeth. So that's a bad one, a total swing and miss by Drury, just kind of a puzzling signing. Again, I didn't hate it when it happened, but it always felt like it was a little bit too much for somebody like Patrick Nemeth. Too many years, a little bit too much money as well. The other big one, and he's still on the team right now, is Barclay Goodrow. And I was actually going to put Goodrow under the worst trade section, but then I thought about it, and I'm like, no, you know what? That really wasn't a bad trade. They got Barclay Goodrow in exchange for a 7th-round draft pick. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is the contract that they gave him after doing that. When they acquired Goodrow, he was an RFA at the time, so they acquire him for, again, just a 7th-round pick. They bring him in, and the problem, again, the contract that they gave him after that. They give Barclay Goodrow a 6-year deal worth $3.642 million per season and a 15-team no-trade clause to boot. Barclay Goodrow, for his entire contract, from the second it started until the second that it ends, can block a trade to 15 different teams. And honestly, that part of it might be a moot point, because I don't know that any team is going to trade for Barclay Goodrow, not without a sweetener attached, the way that it was in the Patrick Nemeth deal. And let me make something clear. Barclay Goodrow, as far as his play on the ice, he's a far better player than Patrick Nemeth was for the Rangers. Not that, like, Goodrow, again, is like an MVP candidate or anything along those lines. He does do some good things, though. But again, when you look at that contract, the fact that there's still 3 years left on it after this year, and the fact that it's at $3.642 million a season, teams are not going to line up to acquire Barclay Goodrow from the New York Rangers. And I kind of feel bad including him on this, because he is a hard-nosed player. He very clearly cares. He's always hustling and giving it everything he has out there. He's got some value in the fact that he can move around the lineup a little bit. He can play all 3 positions. He's mostly been on the 4th line this year, but it's good to know that you can move him around if you have to. He'll drop the gloves if he has to, even against somebody bigger than him, somebody that's kind of out of his weight class. We've seen him do that a couple of times. He's a very good penalty killer. The Rangers have had a good PK the last few seasons, and we can debate how much of this has to do with Barclay Goodrow, but facts are facts. The Rangers started winning as soon as Barclay Goodrow got here. They brought him in. He's somebody that had won 2 Stanley Cups. He had kind of been there and done that. Again, just a hard-nosed player. They're looking to kind of create a winning culture. And for that reason, again, the trade for Barclay Goodrow was completely fine. 7th-round draft pick for Barclay Goodrow. This contract, though, like, I don't understand why they felt like, oh, my God, we got to lock up Barclay Goodrow long-term. We got to, 6 years and throw all this money at him. I mean, I don't know, man. If I'm an NHL free agent, or I'm going to be traded or something along those lines, give me Barclay Goodrow's agent, because obviously he was doing something right, and there was just no need to go this high for Barclay Goodrow. And the simplest way that I can sum this whole thing up here on Barclay Goodrow, think about this. We've been talking about Buchnevich a lot this episode, right? And the fact that the Rangers went in a different direction rather than bring Buchnevich back during Drury's first offseason as the Ranger general manager. Barclay Goodrow right now makes nearly 2/3 as much per season as Pavel Buchnevich. And on top of that, Barclay Goodrow's contract is 2 seasons longer than Pavel Buchnevich's. So he's going to make more money in the long term on his current contract. I mean, it's over more years, but he'll make more total money than Pavel Buchnevich will. So that's pretty wild to think about. Again, hindsight's always 20/20, but even when the Rangers did this extension with Goodrow, and they had cap space at the time, cap space was not an issue for the team. But you see that it's like 6 years at 3.6 whatever million. That's a lot of money to be giving to somebody that traditionally plays in the bottom 6. Again, hard-nosed player, somebody that had done a lot of winning and does some good things for this team from time to time. But yeah, I mean it's hard to justify a contract like that. And then you have to let somebody like Frank Vatrano go, and Vatrano's getting like $3 million a season. It's definitely less than $4 million. I mean, even there, you'd rather have, I think, Vatrano on this team than Barclay Goodrow. So that was a swing and miss too by Chris Drury. Bringing Goodrow. That part of it was fine, but then giving him the kind of extension that he did, that was certainly a mistake. The other issue that I see from Ranger fans, as far as something that they don't like about Drury, at least a few, they get on him for some of the extensions that he's given out. The only like big extensions, I mean, we could talk about like Jimmy Vesey got a 2-year extension, Ben Harper got a 2-year extension, but those guys are making like, I mean, Harper didn't even play in the NHL this year. Vesey's at like $800K a season. That's barely over the league minimum. That stuff is fine. And Jimmy Vesey, that's a good move by Chris Drury, hanging on to Vesey for that time. But we'll save the good stuff for a different episode. As far as like the costly extensions, the guys making the big money, a lot of people have been getting on Mika Zibanejad recently, and I don't think this has been Mika's best season as a member of the Rangers. But they re-signed him during one of the off seasons for 8 years at $68 million total. So he's got a cap hit of $8.5 million a season. That's basically the going rate for a player of Mika Zibanejad's caliber. I don't think that was like a gross overpayment in the slightest. I decided to look up, other centers around the league and how much does this guy make and how much does that guy make and, who's a steal and, who's overpaid. Mika Zibanejad right now at $8.5 million per season is in a 6-way tie as the 15th highest paid center in the NHL. The other 5 players that he's tied with as far as average annual value are Leon Draisaitl, Steven Stamkos, Bo Horvat, Philip Forsberg, and Mark Scheifele. The only 2 players of those 5 that I'm willing to put ahead of Mika Zibanejad, obviously Leon Draisaitl. He's probably a top 5 player in the NHL the last handful of seasons here. Steven Stamkos, he had some injury problems for a while, but he's been healthy lately. Probably have to put him ahead of Mika. Bo Horvat, no way. Not putting him in front of Mika. Philip Forsberg, I mean, he's a good player. Is he better than Mika? I don't think so. I don't think Mark Scheifele is better than Mika Zibanejad at all, and he's a little bit older, if I'm not mistaken. They might be about the same age. I want to say Scheifele might be just slightly older. But then you've got some centers that actually make more than Mika Zibanejad. Dylan Larkin is one of them. Is he a better center than Mika Zibanejad? You could make the case, but they're comparable. I think Mika probably has the better all-around game between the two. And, Dylan Larkin, he's only making slightly more than Mika. If Larkin's a little bit better than Mika, well, he makes a little bit more money than Mika Zibanejad as well. You've got Matt Barzal. Islander fans will tell you otherwise, but there's no way that Matt Barzal is as good of an all-around player as Mika Zibanejad. Tyler Seguin, he makes more than Mika. I'm not going to put Seguin ahead of Mika at this point. Same thing with Anze Kopitar. I mean, he's been a great player for the Kings for many years, but he's making a little bit more than Mika Zibanejad. I don't see, you look around, you look at centers making the same amount of money as Mika. You look at centers making more. You look at centers making less. There are not many centers in this league right now who I think are a significantly better value to their team based on how much they're making per season. You guys, I mean, there's a few. You'll be able to find a few if you dig deep enough and, oh, this guy's making less than Mika and he's got more points or whatever the case might be. But I don't think, $8.5 million per Mika Zibanejad per season, that's the going rate for a big-time center. And he hasn't had his best season this year. By the way, even in his worst season, Mika Zibanejad, still close to a point per game, still a good face-off guy. He's won more than half of his face-offs. Still a very important part of the Ranger penalty kill. Still a good defensive forward for the Rangers. It's not like the season has been a complete catastrophe for Mika Zibanejad. Would I like to see him get to another level and step on the gas a little bit? And do I hope that his best hockey is still in front of him this season? Yes to all of that. But, I mean, people make it sound like this dude is like nowhere to be found and can't do anything to help the team. I don't see that either. So the Mika extension is $8.5 million a lot. Yeah, it is. But that's about what a center of his caliber gets. There's nothing, when you look at the other centers around the league, there's nobody or very few players that you can look at and say, yeah, that guy is definitely a much better value than Mika Zibanejad based on whatever that player might be making per season. And you can say the same thing about Adam Fox. I see people every now and then complain about Adam Fox. And, anytime he has a turnover or something, it's like, oh, there's your $9.5 million a season defenseman, right? Look, Adam Fox is an elite defenseman in this league. He'll probably be in the Norris conversation toward the end of this year. He won the Norris a couple of years ago. Anything less than $10 million a season for Adam Fox to me was acceptable, and they got him for 9.5. I think that's a nice job. The guy won the Norris. That goes to the best defenseman in the NHL. He's still very young. I think the Rangers are really fortunate to have a defenseman this good locked up for as long as they do. Is it pricey? Yes. Is Adam Fox an elite defenseman who is worthy of a big contract? Also, yes. If you want to have big-time elite players on your team, then you're going to have to pony up the dough from time to time. And, I think also when the cap goes up next season, maybe this will kind of lessen the blow that these two players are making on the salary cap, Fox and Mika, but they're both good players and they both earned every dime that they got. And then there's other players, people complain about Kreider and his salary, Trouba and his salary. Both of them were signed before Drury, so we're not even going to cover them. We can talk about them in a future episode if you guys would like. But again, we're looking at Chris Drury and the moves that he's made in today's episode, and specifically the not-so-good moves. We're keeping everything rolling in just a second. There's a couple of so-so moves that have kind of polarized the fan base. I don't know that you can look at any of these that I'm going to talk about and think that they're disastrous signings, but we're going to cover all of those in just a second. First, though, we definitely want to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Sleeper. It is past the halfway point of the season, Ranger fans, and the team is still in first place and riding high on a 4-game winning streak. But regardless of where we are in the current standings, I want to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether studs like Igor or Panarin or Kreider or Lafreniere will record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more in a given game. To win 100 times your bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8-player stats. You heard me, Ranger fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you will get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here. There's a little bit of this and that to conclude the episode as far as, moves that Drury has made that maybe some people didn't like or found questionable. The most polarizing move, I think, maybe of his entire tenure was the trade for Patrick Kane right at the trade deadline last season. They had to do all sorts of salary cap gymnastics and play a man or two down for certain games. It really split the fan base. To me, when you're in a unique situation, as the Rangers were last year, where you've got a chance to trade for one of the absolute best players to ever play hockey, and you don't have to give up a whole lot to do it because he only wants to go to play with the Rangers. He didn't want to accept a trade to any other team. I think it's a move that you have to make, and you can get Patrick Kane again for Andy Welinski, a conditional second rounder, which stayed a second rounder. It could have become a first rounder if the Rangers went a little farther in the playoffs, but it stayed a second rounder, a 4th round pick in 2025, and a conditional 3rd round pick. That's the one that went to the Coyotes because, of course, the Coyotes took on part of Kane's salary, which allowed the Rangers to complete the trade. If that's all you have to give up, you do it. It's really as simple as that. You want to win a Stanley Cup. You want to be the last team standing. I think that, you have to make a couple of bold moves. And again, to be able to bring in Kane the way that they did without having to give up somebody on the current roster like Miller or even like Kakko or Schneider, without having to give up a prospect on this team like, an Othman or a Sakura. I mean, what did they really give up? They gave up a couple of draft picks. It'll be all right. I think it was worth the gamble. By that same token, it did at times feel like something was a little bit off with Patrick Kane with the Rangers. It just felt like he didn't gel with his new teammates the way that other people did. And granted, I don't see everything that happens behind the scenes, but just kind of going by what I saw on TV, we've seen the Rangers trade for other players at the deadline in recent seasons, and those guys come in and it's like they're reuniting with their best friends. You never really saw a ton of that from Patrick Kane. Like, I don't know that he was like disliked by his teammates, but it just felt like he wasn't like part of the Ranger family the way that some other players have been after they've been acquired. So that's just kind of how I felt. But the bottom line, I can't kill Drury for this move either, because again, you are trying to win a Stanley Cup and you've got the Blackhawks pretty much you've got a ton of leverage on them, and the championship window is open and Drury decided to go for it. And I can't really fault him for doing that. You guys can let me know in the comment section, because this one really, maybe more than anything else, the trade for Kane really split the Ranger fans. And if you guys have any thoughts on it, any thoughts on any of this, leave it in the comments section. Be happy to hear from you guys. And I just realized what I did. I just reopened this can of worms where everybody's going to be arguing about Patrick Kane. But be that as it may, just at least be respectful of each other's opinions, please, in the YouTube comments section. There's also a couple things that Drury has done that have not worked out that you can nitpick a little bit. One thing that kind of springs to mind is the last 2 off seasons, he's been in the market for a free agent 4th line center, and neither has worked at all. 2 years, or I guess last year we'll call it, he brings in Ryan Carpenter. He ends up getting waived and plays out the season with the Wolfpack. This year it was Nick Bonino. Same thing. He's waived. His contract is terminated. So those two picks by Drury were obviously not good ones because neither player even got close to making it all the way through the season. But they're misses, yes, but they're not like franchise crippling and like, oh my God, we can't win the Stanley Cup now because our fourth line center didn't work out. Look, the Rangers are a better team now for Johnny Brodzinski being up on the main roster than they were when Nick Bonino got here. So at least they've kind of, adjusted on the fly and recognized a mistake. So are these technically misses by Drury? Yes, they are. But again, I don't think it's something that, does it really keep anybody up at night? Oh my God, the Rangers signed Ryan Carpenter before the start of last season. Like, are we really going to do this? Like, it's just not that big of a deal. Somebody else you could throw out there is Blake Wheeler. I know there's some Ranger fans that haven't really been feeling this move ever since the Rangers made it. And, he's older, of course. I've been underwhelmed by Blake Wheeler's play at times. And there are occasions where, I find myself thinking forward to the playoffs because it certainly looks like the Rangers are going to be part of it. Obviously, they still have to earn it. Never say never. And, they have to keep going here. But it looks like they're in obviously good position to be part of the postseason. And I do worry a little bit about Blake Wheeler being able to keep up with the pace of play in the postseason. But, they brought this guy in for 1 year and $800,000. And, I'll throw a stat at you guys. In his last 42 games, Blake Wheeler has 21 points. It's passable. It's not a stellar amount, but they brought him in to be a third liner. The fact that he's had to play the first line, it is what it is. It goes back to the whole, Buchnevich situation where they can't find a top line right winger. But, he's a half point per game player over his last 42 games. Were people really expecting like prime Blake Wheeler, the guy that was like, a point per game player and then some? If you were, I don't really know what to tell you. That was just never going to be the case. I don't think it's been nearly as bad of a signing as a lot of Ranger fans have suggested that it was. So I can't kill him for the Blake Wheeler signing. Erik Gustafsson, six-figure defenseman to play the sixth defenseman role for this team. He got off to an outstanding start this season. He hasn't played as well recently, but again, you're trying to fill out your roster and you don't have a ton of cap space to do it. Are there a lot of defensemen out there making six figures that would be such an improvement on Erik Gustafsson? I don't think that there are. And, one other thing that I want to talk about here, I mentioned at the start of the episode here that wasn't going to talk too much about the drafts that Drury has had because it's just too early. You can't possibly assess these players and know for sure how their NHL careers are going to go. The only miss that I'm willing to already call a miss for Chris Drury, if we go back to the 2021 draft, again, that was his first year as the general manager of the Rangers. In the third round, first pick of the third round, in fact, the Rangers at number 65 overall took center Jaden Grube. Grube on the May 31st of last year ended up being traded to the Oilers for just a fifth round pick. So that's kind of a weird one, right? The Rangers, this is a third round pick, started the third round at that, and they gave up on him very, very quickly. And they did so despite the fact that Grube had 67 points in 64 games in his final season in the WHL. And he's still only 21 years old. The Rangers, they got the fifth round pick. They use it to draft defenseman Rasmus Larsson. Just a strange trade that I can't really find any rhyme or reason for why the Rangers would do it. This was your guy. You took him with a third rounder. Maybe let things play out a little bit. Just kind of a strange one there. So I'm willing to call that a miss as far as Drury's draft classes, but that's pretty much it. There's nothing else that's happened in the Ranger drafts over the past couple of years that I think should really keep anybody alive or keep anybody awake at night. There's just we're waiting for careers to play out. And when you get into the later rounds, it's all dart throws anyway. So I'm not going to worry about like, oh man, they whiffed on that seventh round pick, the guy that they took 228th overall back in 2021. Who cares? It's very rare to get, a big time steal that late in the draft. So bottom line, Chris Drury has whiffed at times during his tenure as the Ranger general manager. The only like really two big like catastrophes where it's like, wow, that was bad, were the Buchnevich trade and the Patrick Nemeth signing. Beyond that, I don't see really anything that he's done, whether it's, in-house extensions to guys like Mika and Adam Fox, whether it's the trades that he's made at the deadline. A lot of these guys have come over and really helped the Rangers a lot. Whether it's, the draft, again, we can't really assess that right now. Free agent signings, I think, have mostly been good. And we're going to talk about some of those players in a future episode when we do the other side of this and look at Drury's biggest hits as a general manager of the Rangers. Something I wonder too, like maybe for some Ranger fans, it's not so much the things Drury has done, it's the things that Drury has not done. Everybody talks about, oh, we want more strength and size and physicality and sandpaper and grit. We got to have grit, right? But then the Rangers do moves like that, and they bring in guys like Ryan Reeves, and they bring in guys like Barclay Goodrow, and they bring in, you could even say Jacob Trouba. I mean, that's cheating a little because that's before Drury was the general manager. Even Sammy Blais, Blais was a wrecking ball. He hit people a lot out there. All those players come in and they're here to make the Rangers bigger, tougher, more physical, more difficult to play against, on and on and on. And every player that I just mentioned there at one time or another has really come under fire from the Ranger fans. So I don't know what you want. There's people that say they want more grit and more strength and more toughness, but then they get it and they're not happy with that either. So I don't really see, what the issue there is. Another thing that I've heard is, people get upset at Drury because, oh man, he always trades for rentals around the trade deadline. It's always guys that are only here for half a season, and he gives away draft picks to bring in people for just half a season. Welcome to the NHL. That is what teams do. There's a lot of teams that are in a similar situation as the Rangers. They want to improve their team at the deadline for the stretch run as well as a possible deep playoff run. And they know that they can't afford certain players long term. So they bring in guys on expiring contracts. And in many situations, that player will do exactly that. He'll be with whatever team acquires him for half a season, and then he'll be on his way in free agency to somewhere else, a team that can afford him the following offseason. And by the way, there were quite a few Ranger rentals the year that they won it all in 1994. Two that immediately popped to mind for me are Craig McTavish as well as Glenn Anderson. The two of them played big-time roles. Matteau, I want to say, was there for like half a season and then the next season after that. And the same thing for Steve Larmer. Those were guys that they brought in, kind of near the deadline that season. But again, teams do this. It's a tactic that is used by just about every general manager to bring in a rental and make the team better in the short run, knowing that there's not that good of a chance that you can hang on to them in the long term. Then you also have people say things like, the Rangers, oh man, they always give up on their players too early. They trade them away and then they become great players. Who are these players besides Pavel Buchnevich? I guess you could maybe say JT Miller, but the Rangers were rebuilding at the time. And again, that move is pre-Drury as well. But I mean, how many players that if the Rangers trade away and really, really been burned for it? I don't think the list is as long as a lot of people would suggest. I mean, you guys can let me know. Leave it in the comment section. A few other, players that maybe the Rangers gave up on too early. But yeah, there's not a ton popping into my head right now. I figure we could pretty much call it there. Like I said, next week we're going to continue with this, the second part of this two-part series here, where we take a look at Chris Drury's biggest hits as general manager of the Rangers. And one other piece of news, Igor Shesterkin going to be back in goal for the Rangers tonight against the Flames. So definitely looking forward to that. And thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. If you would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that is @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to the Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.